Welcome to the Peace Catalyst podcast, where we share stories to inspire, uplift, and encourage you in your peacemaking journey. I'm Becca Tybel, and I work with Peace Catalyst International here in the Washington, D.C. area. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Keith Giles.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Keith, and I'm really looking forward to today's podcast. If you enjoy the Peace Catalyst podcast, would you please do us a favor and take some time to rate and review us on whatever platform you happen to be listening on, because it really does help to boost our visibility, and it does encourage others to check us out. So if you would do that, we would really appreciate it.
We know you love listening to us, so just take a couple seconds.
Sure.
And we've been doing a peace quote of the week. And this quote may come from an unexpected source, but it's really powerful. It says, "When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace."
And who's that by? Who said that?
That quote is by Jimi Hendrix.
Yes. The great peace theologian, Jimi Hendrix. Yeah.
It's so simple, but it's so profound.
Yeah. Well, that's why I love that quote. There's so much truth in that, right? Like when the power of love overcomes the love of power. Yeah. I mean, because I think it kind of speaks to the idea, at least for me, that quote speaks to the idea of how really living in a more peaceful and just world is within our grasp, right? We get to decide what kind of world we live in. And as long as the love of power is kind of what's driving us, or the love of money, or the love of, anything else, until the power of love is the main thing, we really can't move beyond where we're at. And so that's what it means to me. And I guess to me, it's a very Jesus-y quote to me. I can see Jesus saying something like that from the Sermon on the Mount, right? That we have to let go of our love of power, or our love of money, or our love of anything else. This sort of selfishness and seeking our own, having selfish goals and motives. Once we're really motivated by love, and love is about other people. And I think that's kind of the key.
Absolutely. And I think the love of power is something that keeps a lot of wars and conflicts going and prevents peace in a lot of different situations. So really powerful.
Well, thanks, Jimmy. That was really cool. And we are continuing our ongoing series, interviewing Peace Catalyst staff around the country and the globe. And we're asking them about sharing their peacemaking journeys and how they're building connection and understanding and collaboration within their communities and their neighbors for peace. And so it's been a great series, and we're looking forward to continuing.
Yeah, and this week we're interviewing our international staff, Bryan and Stephanie Carey, who are working with local peacebuilders in Sarajevo in Bosnia Herzegovina. And they're partnering with Christian and other leaders around the world to equip and empower Christians for peacebuilding virtually, which is incredible. I'm excited to learn more about their story today.
Bryan and Stephanie, welcome to the Peace Catalyst podcast. We're so excited to have you on our podcast.
Thanks so much.
Good to be here.
So tell us again quickly, where are you guys?
We're in Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it's in the Balkans, so just east of Western Europe. We're in Eastern Europe.
So this is really cool. I'm sure we'll get to this as you're telling your story, but because I kind of want to know how you got there. That's not, you're not from there, but I'm sure you'll tell that story as we go along. But can you give us an idea of how did you come to Peace Catalyst, or what made you want to be a part of Peace Catalyst?
Sure. Well, in our former lives before Peace Catalyst, we were actually working in engineering. So I'm from Texas. We both met in Houston at an engineering internship. I was getting a degree in biomolecular and chemical engineering, and Bryan was getting his in civil and environmental. And so shortly before we met, as I was working in this engineering job, I was thinking, did I want to work for a for-profit company? Maybe I had more options. Maybe I could work for a nonprofit organization or work. And I wanted to kind of explore that in some way. Like, how could I contribute to positive social development in a not-for-profit context? And so that desire really grew as Bryan and I got to know each other. We traveled abroad for a year after graduation. And so at that point, it made sense to take just a few years to study and think together and individually what direction we wanted our lives to go. So we took 3 years to get a Master's of Divinity in Atlanta together. And there, it was really a gift to have that time and the resources.
Right after we got married, yeah.
Yes, we got married, and then 2 weeks later, we started classes together. So,
oh man,
a little bit of a honeymoon. We took the first full semester just to really enjoy Atlanta and starting into our studies.
Yeah.
Wow. So you met in an internship program to be in engineers, and then you got married and went to Atlanta together to go into this sort of nonprofit program thing.
Well, yeah, it was an MDiv program, so Masters of Divinity. A lot of people also, not just like for pastors and others, but a lot of people who do nonprofit work, especially related to any sort of, spiritual, like religious communities. There were, I forget how many of our classmates, like many went into nonprofit work in addition to many becoming pastors. So we'd gone there specifically more interested in kind of nonprofit work and thinking through our faith and how that would apply in life in some sort of social betterment, nonprofit work in general. But while we're there, for me, I'd really been motivated by my faith for a long time before that. So even before we met, Stephanie took 4 years to finish like a triple major, and she's absolutely brilliant. I took 7 years to finish one, but it's really not as bad as it sounds. I actually ended up taking like 2.5 years off. And so I lived in the Amazon jungle for about a year, Latin America for about 1.5 years. And so I was down there and living in the jungle and learning from these local guys about hunting and fishing in the jungle. But it was some pastors and kind of growing youth pastors who had invited me and 2 other guys. And so we were there kind of helping them figure out what does it look like to live out their faith. Well, they were helping us figure out how to survive and build our own hut, hunt and fish, all these things. And so while we were there, it was really transformational for me. And I think kind of like a first step towards peace building prior to ever having language about that or really thinking about that in multiple ways. One, just really discovering how transformational these like mutual relationships are. That, we survived and learned so much, like literally survived, but then learned so much through these relationships with these local guys who were really our teachers. And then also did what we could to really try to share and kind of enter into that world and really share in ways that would be relevant for them. And it was really impactful for me. At the same time, it was really impactful because looking back at the United States and all of a sudden this real kind of reevaluation of sort of America as a Christian nation and this coupling together of America and my faith. And that sort of started to split apart as I saw really the mixed history of the United States and Latin America. And that was really impactful and started to impact kind of, I think, everything on my journey after that. But then actually, so I'd gone back to the States and I'd gone back to school to finish my degree. And then I was doing this engineering internship whenever I'd met Stephanie. And at the time, again, really this faith motivation. So I was going into work and like wearing a suit and tie in this, corporate office setting doing this engineering work. But then I was living right nearby in this, it was at the time ranked one of the most violent streets in the United States. And so I was living at this halfway house, helping these guys get back onto their feet. As you know, they're trying to get IDs and figure out work and have a stable address and phone number so that way they can start to pull their lives back together. And that was the most intense culture shock I'd ever felt. And it was deeply impactful because also since I was living in this area, there'd be regular church groups that are coming down to serve. And I'd regularly be mistaken for one of these homeless or struggling guys. And so to be experience kind of the attitudes and the approaches of these churches, and in a lot of ways, not all of it positive, just with the attitudes that they'd have towards me, was really impactful again, and really about how much more mutual transformation is. Because so many of these guys, their stories and what they've been through, deeply impactful on me. And then realizing sometimes even the mixed influence or mixed kind of ways in which churches would be involved. So I think all those are two real major experiences. And that one was right as I'd met Stephanie, had really kind of shifted my mindset from, in some way, coming from the United States, coming from a middle class background as somebody that was like, I had a reason to sort of have this savior mentality, to something where it's really much more mutually transformational. And that stuck deeply because of these really, just really formational periods of my life, both a year and a half in Latin America, and then this intense culture shock experience of corporate world to real rough neighborhood every day, back and forth. So we'd met to kind of pick up where Stephanie left off. And so we'd gotten married like a year and a half to 2 years after that. And then we started at getting our MDivs. And I focused specifically at that point on justice, peace building, and conflict transformation. And so, because we were both getting more interested in peace building work as an expression of how we live out our faith. And also really thinking about interreligious peace building. And so, what does it look like to build really a sustainable peace and to connect across religious barriers? So we're studying that. I was working with different church groups in the Atlanta area where we were studying, and helping church groups to connect across religious boundaries and these other experiences where I'm meeting these diverse neighbors in the United States and inviting these church groups along. And it was at that point, because we're also studying, again, we're getting our MDiv, and I'm studying justice, peace building, and conflict transformation, but I really started to encounter these different peace building voices and theologians who are articulating more about this peace-oriented theology that there's this historic stream of. And so it was at that point that I started to really capture this idea of really the work of the church and really what Jesus was doing as this work of healing and reconciliation. And I started to shift my language. And as I was working with church groups, tried to challenge kind of this, the way in which kind of this dominant framework was really about salvation. But it really didn't guide people towards some sort of like, what does that mean? Like, where is that headed? There was no trajectory to that. It was either escapist or kind of this endpoint. You're saved and you've kind of arrived. And for me, it was like, there's just a beginning. Whenever we're learning to follow Jesus and encountering Jesus in some way, it should lead to some sort of new way of relating to one another, which is transformational for everyone. So, I mean, like for me and my experiences, again, like in Latin America, in urban settings, that it's like this changed my life, learning how to connect with my neighbor, learning how to love my neighbor. And also, I think in various ways was really, hopefully transformational for other people around me as well.
There was that point that someone directed you to Rick Love. Said, you sound like Rick Love. You should meet this guy.
Yeah. So I've been articulating more and more, trying to articulate like theologies or missiology even of healing and reconciliation. And that's whenever somebody introduced me to Rick Love via email. And so we started chatting on the phone, and we'd exchange emails. I was writing different articles to try to, move the needle in terms of how some churches were looking at their own approach to sort of mission or the vocation of the church or the work of the church. And then one thing led to another, and we ended up joining Peace Catalyst after we graduated. And I'd ended up, just even to connect it to the Balkans, I'd done a directed study specifically looking at interethnic violence in the Balkans and how much religion was co-opted to foment hatred and further division because of it being this key identifier between ethnic groups. And also at the same time, so kind of, inter-religious violence, if you will, even though some people would say, well, it wasn't because of religion, but the impact of religion on divisions and violence, but then also really looked at these examples of these peace builders who were doing and still are doing incredible work in the Balkans, motivated by their faith. So that was the Balkans already at that point had been a part of the world that had really captured my attention, but then
this is a fascinating part of the world. I moderately forgot about Yugoslavia after in 9th grade they were like, hey, this big region of the world is breaking up, and I was like, okay. And then I somewhat stopped learning about Eastern Europe and the Balkans. But then, yes, in master's program, we started learning about it more, and it is just,
that's awesome.
It's just amazing. And there's so many opportunities here and so many people who've done peace work for 25 years, more.
Even there's such a long, beautiful history, as well as the history that most people are aware of. This is where empires came together. People think about Israel-Palestine as kind of this land bridge between empires that resulted in a lot of collision of civilizations. The Balkans is probably that, or even more. You have Catholicism and Orthodoxy. It's like the dividing line was through Bosnia. And then you have the Ottoman Empire that came up into Europe and extended into Bosnia. And so there's East and West. There's, EU and Russia. There's Catholicism and Orthodoxy. There's Christianity and Islam. And so there's Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Russia and the EU and the United States. And it's so in terms of even
converges here.
Even in proxy wars and influence of foreign nations and kind of how messy things get whenever you have these foreign powers, so many things converge right in this little part of the world, which both makes it really complicated, because it's not just, there's local tensions. Local tensions can be aggravated by these foreign powers that have interest in the region. But then there's also incredible locals who have been navigating these dynamics for generations. And so, yeah, it's really a privilege to be here, and we love it.
Yeah. And I know that's what I love about how you all do your work, because I know you're partnering with those peace builders on the ground who have been doing the work, like you mentioned. And it's just an incredible model for how we build peace. And for our listeners who are maybe curious, which university did you both do your programs at?
At Candler School of Theology at Emory University in Decatur. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because you mentioned that you were doing peace building and conflict resolution, and I was thinking there are Christian schools that teach that, because a few years ago I was actually having a conversation with someone, and we were making a point to say how odd it is that so many, you look at all these Christian schools and they don't have a peace program and peace studies program. Why not, if that's supposed to be our big mission? So the fact that you had, was it a good program? Would you recommend it?
Yeah, I really like it. It definitely, it's funny because among conservative Christians, they look at it as this liberal university and, dangerous, don't go there. But then among a lot of more progressive Christians, they look at it and they're like, oh my gosh, there's a lot of real conservative people there, and even some conservative professors. And so Candler really intentionally cultivates Christian diversity in its student population and among its professors. And so, I think for me, it was so deeply formational, because before you really engage in any sort of, inter-religious or inter-ideological, intergroup across differences, conversations and peace building work, it's really impactful to have these intra-group conversations within your own group. And so at Candler, there's, we had, from, 7-day creationists to, practicing Episcopal LGBTQ monks. So it was this incredible range of, you have charismatics, you have people practicing high liturgy, you have theology all over the map that literally I myself had this like so many experiences, like I didn't realize that Christians could think like this or be like this.
Yeah.
We're all in the same room.
But then you had people like that from each kind of side, conservative, liberal, whatever denomination, because they'd encounter these others. They're like, I didn't realize that other Christians thought this way in multiple dimensions.
Yeah.
And so it really taught it forced me to learn how to have conversations even about difference, and to kind of be curious about differences, even within our own Christian group. And how do we really, live out with that curiosity and ask good questions and try to think deeply? And it's deeply uncomfortable for a lot of people, because whenever we are hearing people articulate these differences, it challenges our own thinking, our own assumptions. It forces us to articulate what we think and to kind of reevaluate in ways that a lot of people find deeply uncomfortable. So Candler does that really well. And then because of that, the conflict transformation program really builds on that in helping people think about kind of doing that beyond just sort of this Christian, really diverse, but Christian bubble at the School of Theology there.
Yeah. And, that's an interesting point. I mean, I don't want to derail us talking about colleges, but it is an interesting, when you are in a place where you are surrounded by people who don't think the way you do, and it does kind of open your eyes. It teaches you to listen to people that are, have different perspectives on things. I thought it was fascinating because my youngest son, David, went to Biola, and Biola is typically seen as a very conservative school. In fact, I was a little concerned, like, is it too conservative? I'm not sure what's going to happen if my son, graduates from this college. But the funny thing is, even though that's kind of like you would label as an outsider looking in, Biola's conservative, I know a lot of the guys who are professors there, and I know that a lot of those guys are really progressive. And the interesting thing is that even though, again, the school has that label, they allow professors to, of course, have their own ideas. The students themselves have, different backgrounds, come from different backgrounds and views. And I was actually pleasantly surprised how much the school encouraged conversations that didn't kind of necessarily line up with their theological, statement of faith. And so, yeah, there maybe some ways those labels don't really work, because you're always, no matter where you go, you're going to probably end up encountering people that don't agree with you on things, which is in the long run a very, very good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. If anything, it can help you articulate what you do believe in a positive way. It doesn't necessarily have to sway you one way or the other. But it was a really great gift for us, just starting out and thinking about peace work, just starting the ecumenical conversation at Candler was wonderful.
Yeah.
Bryan, you shared about all these experiences that led you towards peace building. And I think anytime that we leave America and travel to somewhere else in the world, it's going to radically change our perspective. So thanks for sharing that. And also connecting with a community that is so different from what you grew up with. And but I'm just curious, Stephanie, if there were moments or experiences for you that kind of prompted you towards the same direction, towards peace building.
Yeah, I think my experiences came later. It was actually after I met Bryan that we took a year off after we graduated. So we started at different times. As Bryan said, he took 7 years, I took 4. But we graduated at the same time. And then we went to Peru. I visited some of the places that he had lived, which was very stretching for me. I'm not into mosquitoes. But also, yes, so we traveled around Peru. And then I worked for a little while in Cambodia with the Methodist Church, helping workers there articulate what they do to an American audience. So, and then we were also in Zambia for a few months doing water wells, and I was working at a malnutrition clinic. At that point in my journey toward peacemaking, if you will, I was trying things on for size. I had no idea what I was interested in doing, because when I decided I don't need this specific for-profit job, what else is available to me? Then I wanted to try it all. So in so doing, I think those experiences abroad were very uncomfortable, but also wonderful, because I was in contact with people who were so different from me. So culturally, religiously, different age groups, different theologies, even within Christianity. And I think that was really helping prime me for work that was outside of my comfort zone. But yeah, I was a little late bloomer until around, right, exactly, around age 21. I was on the treadmill toward doing whatever was laid in front of me corporately. And so, yeah, I changed a little bit late in the game. So it's never too late to change, as you said.
Never too late. Yeah. And what was it? Okay, you said that you were uncomfortable in those experiences. What was it that was so uncomfortable for you?
I'm a creature of comfort. So Bryan knows that I need my coffee every morning and afternoon. I have my favorite pillow. So honestly, it was physically getting out of my routine. Traveling.
You were in rough areas.
I was in rough areas. Yes, this was not, from hotel to hotel. So,
I mean, this is the Amazon jungle. This is the middle of, not the middle. It was the town that was in the middle of the bush in Africa, in Zambia. I mean, and this is a slum in
Cambodia. Yeah, and so that was just a brand new experience for me. And I think that level of discomfort makes you understand things about yourself. But also it makes you question, what really is important. If I'm given this amount of time to work towards something, what am I going to work towards? And I think that time clarified for me that I wanted to work towards bettering society in a very tangible way, which was helpful. It was helpful to have those 3 years at Candler to really tease out, okay, that's great. That's the direction you want. But what exactly is God going to look like? So yeah, that was a time where I used that newly found passion and then kind of rediscovered some gifts or some of my training really from my engineering program and had those merged together.
I love hearing your background. I feel like I know you guys, but there are things I haven't learned and it's really cool. Yeah. So cool to learn. So when you you came to Peace Catalyst, and did you start out in Sarajevo? Like, was that always the plan to be doing peace building?
We were really drawn to Sarajevo because it is a mix of these 3 different ethnicities and religions, all in one city. It's kind of a small city. I think Sarajevo proper is 300,000 people, but you have this radical mixing of people. But it's also these incredible divisions that still exist years and years and years after the wars in the 1990s. So we were drawn here for that reason, but also because there was a PCI colleague who had connections here, and he connected us to them before we were set on Sarajevo. And so Bryan did a few trips here. We started asking, okay, we're 2 Americans with a small toddler. Could we be useful here? Yeah. The last thing we would want to do is impose ourselves on others and say, hey, we have information for you, listen to us. What we really wanted to do is set ourselves as learners and supporting the work that was already happening here. And so we made some trips here before we decided to move here, thinking, is there an invitation to work? Yeah. And is there work that we can join and actually benefit or be a benefit to them? And so after that period of discernment, then yes, we decided that Sarajevo was ideal. And so we've thoroughly enjoyed it ever since.
Wow. And how long have you been there now?
Been in Sarajevo almost 4 years to the day.
Wow. Happy anniversary.
Nice, huh? And you all have led teams of people to work alongside you from the U.S., catalyze Bosnia. What is that like, and what do you do with folks when they come to visit you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think from the beginning, even for us in coming and kind of asking a lot of questions and knowing we could have tons to learn from local peace builders, as well as asking, like, how can we support things here? We've always had this posture of really, whenever we go anywhere, we have so much more to learn. In any context, we have so much more that we can really learn, and how we can grow and how we can be formed, than in some way that we can, dispense all this wisdom, or, have all these have whatever to offer. And of course, I think as we have had more time here, there are ways in which, we have different gift sets that people are like, oh, could you help out with X, Y, and Z? And, we're happy to do so. But to have this initial posture of going to a place to really learn, to support, is essential. And so for us, with even short-term groups, there have been several different friends. I mean, we had different pastor friends, different church groups that had asked, it's like, what would it be like for us to bring a church to Bosnia and help you out? And for me, it was like, I'm not so sure about that. Like, it's just the context being so complex, and the perspective of foreigners getting involved with peace work, which is complex, which is worth a whole conversation. It was like, it really isn't about coming to Bosnia in order to fix something or do something. And so I've been in conversation with several of my closest friends here and colleagues, and two of them are Muslim peace builders who are just absolutely incredible. And so we had been kind of brainstorming. I shared, I was like, there's some church groups that are interested in coming. I'm not sure what to do with that. But then we started kind of talking together and processing. It was like, what if we would kind of form these learning trips where people could come and learn from local peace builders, and then at the same time, could we, with that foreign group coming to learn, create a safe space for locals from different backgrounds to also join this trip and to hear from local peace building practitioners, probably stories they've never had the chance to hear before, from whether it's Serb and Orthodox Serbs and Catholic Croats learning from Muslim Bosniaks, or vice versa, Muslim Bosniaks learning from Serbs and Croats, Catholic and Orthodox peace builders. And so that was really the design, is how can we create this learning space with foreigners who, from a local perspective, which is pretty accurate, really know little to nothing about Bosnia. So how do we create a space in which they can really learn from these highly experienced peace builders, as well as that kind of learning atmosphere, create such a space that locals could hear one another's stories?
Well, it really had two goals, right? The goal for the foreigners who came, who I think the first trip was mostly Americans, is that right? Mostly American context, but for foreigners to come, the goal would be, hey, how do we create a space here where you can learn and then translate the things that you've learned to your own context back home? How can we equip you to be peacemakers back in the US, right? And then for the locals, it's like, how can we, first of all, connect you to people that you may not have encountered? As outsiders, we kind of are able to work among all groups in the somewhat neutral zone. So how can we introduce you to those peacemakers, but then how do we introduce you to Americans as well who are listening to you, and really valuing your perspective, and how do we empower you to continue your work here? So it really was an interesting pilot project. It went really well.
It went incredibly well. Yeah, the feedback was incredible, and the follow-up since then, people, we're excited
to start doing it again. Right. Everything post-COVID.
So,
But you did a virtual one last year, which I was a part of. And that was incredible.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah. I think for quite a few of the local folks, including myself, that kind of encountering another person, you can only get a tiny fraction of that experience in something that's online. And so much of the impact for people, because again, we're hearing stories of incredible pain, but then you're also hearing stories from these peace builders and practices they go through, and some workshops that they held of how they're overcoming some of these divisions.
So much hope and joy.
It's incredible. And then at the same time, you're eating all these meals together, you're connecting, you're having fun. Like, we took the whole group whitewater rafting, which of course the foreigners love, but locals hadn't had the chance to go on their own, rivers to whitewater raft before either. So it's like this atmosphere of like fun and really diving into experiences of pain and wrestling with how to overcome divisions and such joy. It was deeply impactful. So everything online compared to that always feels like we can't replicate it. So we're excited.
You just need to come in person next
exactly,
time.
I'll have to come in person.
So.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would
sure.
too.
You too, Keith.
And right now you're partnering with local peace builders on a trauma-sensitive peace building class. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously here in Bosnia and Herzegovina, there's a whole history of trauma with war, ethnic cleansing, everything that way. There's also a ton of intergenerational trauma, which is even in a huge way related to kind of all the ethnic divisions that various politicians were able to kind of stir up in the build up to the war, from World War II, especially, but then even now with youth and the stories and experiences of their parents being passed down. And so unhealed trauma really resulting in, ongoing widespread social distrust, which isn't even just kind of at a social level towards other groups, but even just affects people's interpersonal relationships with even people in their own group. It just, there's so much social distrust as a result of all this historical and intergenerational trauma, and that being passed down in families,
which isn't unique to Bosnia.
Well, exactly what I was going to jump into. Yeah. And so also though, I mean, something that I think is really important for me, and from the beginning of our time here, even from some of the initial trips in coming here, to see how could we support local peace building work, is that there's this distrust, for really good reason, of foreigners that have been involved in peace building work, because peace has oftentimes been this imposed idea, just like in different circles, kind of forgiveness or reconciliation. There are these things that are incredibly complex, incredibly deep. Trust building requires a tremendous amount of time. Healing and the choice to forgive and so many other processes require a lot of work, a lot of self-examination, a lot of healing, and so lots of ways in which Bosnians have perceived of foreigners. There's been this kind of imposition at times of what peace and peace building could look like. And at the same time, there's been a lot of foreign meddling that has really been problematic in terms of exacerbating local divisions, because of, again, it being in this place between powers. So the reason I bring this up is that so much of, for me, in my posture and working with locals, there's really this really incredibly valid question of, why should we bother listening to you whenever your work in some way is related to kind of questions about kind of us dealing with our past, us going into these incredibly complex, challenging issues, like, forgiveness of people that have done, horrific crimes, or, other people groups, and these are ways that we've been harmed. And so there's this kind of inherent question in that, especially for Westerners, and then even more specifically for Americans, that it's like, well, have you really done your homework?
Who are you to lead a trauma course?
Right.
Yeah. Whenever we talk about, I mean, so like in the Balkans, so much of this history, I mean, it goes back to World War II, to World War I, to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, to the Ottoman Empire, to the Battle of Kosovo in 1389. And so all of a sudden for foreigners, and especially even for us as Americans then, to say, we need to think about issues of the past. We need to work through, historic trauma and how groups have harmed one another. For them, there's that inherent question of, well, have you done your work? Because we don't see that America has.
Right.
So there's this posture that is required of us living as foreigners. You're kind of a little bit under the spotlight in a way that is, if there's foreigners that move into, your town in the United States, it's the same kind of thing. It's like, like, what are they doing here? And it's like, what's their motivation? And, whatever that way. And so for people really curious about us, it's like, well, you're wanting to do peace work, but all these incredibly complex topics, it's like, have you done your work too? So I think for me, it's incredibly important, and has been from the very first trip here, to really be able to lead with this sort of self-reflective, vulnerable posture, with this sensitivity towards really valid distrust that a lot of people would have towards Westerners talking about these ideas, but not applying them back home. And so, I mean, all that to say related to this trauma course is that all the things that we see in terms of historic trauma in Bosnia, all the challenges, all sort of, whether it's, groups that have perpetuated harm, which is, at different points in history has been one group versus another group, whatever that way. It's complex. Again, these empires crossing over this little patch of land. It's like, how much are we able to also kind of recognize the same dynamics that exist in the United States related to kind of historic harms and trauma, and U.S. history is incredibly recent. And so with this trauma course specifically, it's the first course that we've been offering right now is an English course. And so it's Americans, people from the UK and Europe that are joining and thinking about a lot of these questions, learning from a good friend of ours, several good friends of ours are different, both instructors and then guest speakers in the course who have done hundreds to thousands of trauma trainings. And so they have incredible insight to kind of speak to a lot of these dynamics of these cycles of harm and cycles of victims and cycles of aggressors and kind of internal processes and kind of the neuroscience even behind it of kind of what's going on in people's brains whenever they experience trauma and they experience harms. And so all this is so much more common in the West, in the United States, and the impacts of trauma in ongoing cycles of division and conflict. And so to become more conscious of that can help in incredible ways to be able to be more sensitive to the needs, to the wounds that other communities have experienced. So this course right now is for the US. And part of the model in doing this is that basically by developing this in English and making it hopefully self-sustaining financially, we're going to be able to have enough money to make subsidize and make it sustainable financially to offer Bosnian, Serbian, Croatian language trauma-sensitive peacebuilding courses. And so that is something that we've already been in conversation about, and we're excited to begin developing now that this course is underway, and it seems like financially we'll be able to make it sustainable.
Wow, that's really amazing. Cool. So cool.
Yeah, it's incredible because, like you said, so many of us in the U.S., especially white Americans, like we don't have a context for trauma or what. I mean, of course, everyone experiences trauma, but there are so few like structures in place where we can understand it and understand how it impacts people. So that's really, really incredible and exciting to see how that can grow.
Yeah, very cool. I also really like you were saying earlier about how, when just even your whole approach and posture is, coming as an American, to this other country, but not coming, I think, the way I think I've seen it done most of the time, which is, okay, I'm an American, I'm a Christian, I have my MDiv, I've got my training, I'm here to fix everything, everybody, I'm showing up with all the answers, right? But to instead show up with this, which I think is so much more helpful, showing up to say, hey, I've got some stuff to learn here, could you help me? And sitting and listening and collaborating with people, like you said, if there's an opportunity, I have a skill set, well, I can help with that, great. But otherwise, I'm not here. I'm not the answer man, right? We're not the superheroes coming in, swooping in to make everything wonderful. And I think I just really appreciate that about you guys, and that's the way you've come into this situation. And I'm sure it's been a lot more effective than the other way.
Well, you're talking to us 4 years in. So at the very beginning, we started with learning the language, for example,
right.
And fixing printers. Bryan redid an entire website just because a local peace organization was like, hey, I can't access the funders I want to access because they asked for my website link and it's not in English. We're like, oh, well, we can do that.
Right.
And so we really started just helping in the ways that we could, the ways that were needed, which were not glamorous. They weren't sexy.
A lot of grunt work.
A lot of groundwork,
which we still do.
We do,
as much as we can, helping support, like even with the trauma course. I'm not a trauma trainer.
Absolutely not.
And so we're highlighting
not not absolutely not as though you couldn't be, but yes.
No, but it's not like local people here and the expertise that they have and the gift sets that they have, the personal experience they have of leading so many different trainings, the experience of, personal trauma and group trauma, collective trauma, and not even just related to trauma, but even relating to different just peace building skill sets. Like they have cultivated this actively for 20 years. And so these are the voices of people that we want to highlight, both for Westerners to learn from, as well as for locals. And I think that's been something that's been an incredible privilege that I think more and more people have even approached me about, is like, hey, you've met those peace builders in that other community, where because of ethnic divisions or just because of geography and whatever, people haven't had the chance to meet one another. So in order to help support local projects, it's just been an incredible privilege to be like, well, hey, let me talk to this person and see if they'd be willing to join your program. And so these new projects with locals starting up, and again, so kind of playing in some ways like a role of like a networker, of a person
bridge builder,
and between these different groups and providing them opportunities to connect. And again, a lot of people here, they've already connected across these different groups and relationships. So it's not like that doesn't happen, but to play a support role in that, and then to play like a logistical role to help these programs get off the ground, it's so much more sustainable than sort of us ever trying to run something on our own, which wouldn't be relevant and would rightfully kind of be laughed at as irrelevant as foreigners thinking the best. And so it's really been an incredible, like people sometimes think like our work is hard. Like, oh, you're in this post-conflict place where you're in things on the news. It's so difficult. There's all these different narratives, and people now in the States are like, yeah, we understand different narratives and it's really tough. It must be so tough doing this full time. And we're like, we get to hang out with the coolest people in Bosnia who are
them to do their work better.
The people that show up after conflict and are getting to know, the enemy and working through it after deep personal trauma, working through issues of forgiveness and how to love their neighbor. Like these are the most courageous, inspiring people you could meet. And we get to work with them and support their work. And then at times they're like, oh, hey, it can't be a local that says this. Could you lead this part of the conversation? And so like, it's not that, and again, like you said, like already, Keith, that there's times where, you have a skill set so you can offer something. There's a lot of times where you have a skill set, but you shouldn't be the one that says it.
Right.
It needs to be someone else. And so there are ways where even if you do have the capacity to the skill set, when can we learn to kind of, there are times where I really don't do this well, just because I probably tell, like verbal processor, all these different kinds of things. But it's like, how can we appropriately kind of, even where we would have something to say, learn to kind of let the appropriate people kind of step up. And especially in a context where we're foreigners, but I mean, even if I was in the States as a white person, it's like, when are times that I need to learn to kind of sit back and listen more?
Or how can we let our work remain behind the scenes?
Yes.
Like a lot of the prep work and all of the engagement work. How do we just, we put all of that energy and thoughtfulness into making something work, and then we let it go. Which honestly is, it's really fun to see, to see locals really take off and lean into their giftedness. So it, like Bryan said, it's a really privileged place to be.
Yeah.
So cool. Could almost say that you're catalysts.
Whoa. Oh, there's
catalysts.
Whoa.
Whoa. Deep, Becca. That's deep.
I really like the language of, like, instead of like peace building consultant or something, like peace building accompanier, because I think a lot more, like, it isn't even like the primary voices are these incredible locals. So like they've already done so much work for, 2 decades now, and their stories are so inspiring. And so it's really kind of accompanying an accompaniment process more than it is something that I think we can ever rightfully take credit for.
Yeah.
So cool.
Very cool.
Thank you both so much. It's been awesome to hear your story.
Yeah, thank you.
Y'all, cool. This has been wonderful.
Wow. Thank you, Bryan and Stephanie. That was really great.
I love hearing their story. And, I think I'm impacted by kind of the breadth of it, because there's so much that they've experienced, that they've gone through, that they've learned, just years of understanding and learning about, different people groups around the world and their own role in the kingdom of God. And so I'm just struck by, their story being so in depth and layered, and having all these incredible years of knowledge, gaining and learning, and really like understanding peace building before going into a context to become peace builders, especially in an international context, because I think, sometimes as white Americans, especially, we can be caught up in this sort of, I don't want to say, voyeuristic, but almost voyeuristic way of how we approach peacemaking, and especially in an international context. And I think what I really appreciate about them and their story is that they didn't go into this other place and say, oh, we have all the answers, or we know what needs to happen to build peace here. But they really came in with a posture of humility, and their goal was to first listen and learn and understand the people there, and kind of learn from them, and then come alongside them and support local peace builders. So I'm just really encouraged and inspired by how they've approached all of that.
Yeah. Same here. I really appreciated the part of their story about how, they met going to school for this engineering thing, and then had this, like, there's got to be something more to our life. They wanted something more than sort of this corporate dream.
Yeah.
Which, I've done that myself, so I totally resonate with that. And taking that step, I mean, there's this sense in their story that I really relate to as well. Not in the same way, but there is, and I think, sometimes you come to these places in your life where you feel a calling or a tug to take out sort of a step of faith in a different direction that, on one level seems a little crazy, and what are you doing, and why would you do that? And, you've got this degree in engineering, you've got these great jobs lined up, you can make a lot of money. You could have a house and a couple of cars, and why would you want to throw that away? Why would you spend all this time and energy investing in this engineering degree, and why would you walk away from that, right? And so, just having that calling, that tug, that desire to do that, is one thing. But I mean, to step out in faith and really do it, there is that sense of like, and I've had a couple of times in my life, Wendy and I have had a couple of times in our lives where we've had that experience of feeling like God is calling us to do something that doesn't make any sense to anybody else. Your family and your friends think you're crazy, but all you know is, no, we've got to do this. And so I really respect that both of them had the faith and the courage to take that step and to do something a little audacious and, kind of out of the box. And certainly, that in itself is very difficult to do. But then once you're actually out there, now you've put yourself out there, and now you're here you are in another country. That's really scary as well. Now you've got kids, and oh my gosh, right? So it's really, really challenging. And I really appreciate that they took that step. And, we may have skipped over some of the specifics of the challenges of what that was like, but I have no doubt that there are many barriers to overcome, right? But what I think, to me, that what stands out is the way that they've done it. And you touched on that. This, and we talked about it in the conversation, this coming with an attitude and a posture of not fixing, but listening and recognizing, and then that collaboration piece is so important, I may have mentioned this before, but the first time I ran across that was a friend of mine was doing some work in inner city in Costa Mesa, and community building work. And that was one of the most powerful things that I learned from her, was she was talking about how when they would go into those communities, these are like, there was gangs and drugs and low income and a lot of people out of work. And a lot of poverty and a lot of struggles in these at-risk communities in Southern California, and they came in, again, as white middle class American Christians. They didn't come into those situations with answers. They didn't come in there with solutions. We were going to fix it. They really came and just listened and became a part of that community, and moved into the community, bought a house in that neighborhood, lived. This is my neighborhood too now, and really just helped the community figure out what are the biggest challenges, and help the community sort of, facilitating the community's conversation about how do we solve our problems, not telling them how to solve the problem, but sort of imagining alongside them, what do you think our biggest problems are? And what do you think the solutions would be? And then now how can we move forward to working together, solve these problems together? And it was such a different approach, but I think it's much more effective and powerful. And it's very, if I can use the word, it's very incarnational. It feels to me like what we're doing when we take those kinds of approaches it's an incarnational approach in those communities. And to me, that's what works. And that's what I'm really excited about hearing, Bryan and Steph's story.
Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me of our conversation with Peter and Liz when we were talking about power with.
Yeah.
And and I think, Bryan talked about just the history of that region and how complex it is. And to come into that as like a Westerner who hasn't really experienced that kind of trauma.
Yeah.
And I think it's really amazing how they're like bringing in other Westerners who don't really understand that to learn from, local people in Bosnia who have lived it and can teach it and can, can help us to understand where they're coming from so that we can collaborate and support what they're doing. But I love what you're saying about how it's not coming in and being like, I know about peace building, so here's what you need to do. Right. But like you said, really coming alongside people and living life with them and learning from them first before you can collaborate. So
yeah, really I think that's so key because, it also, otherwise it ends up being like a cookie cutter approach. Like, before you even jump on the plane and fly over to this other country that you're going to minister to, you got a book with, step 1, 2, 3 already figured out. And then you show up and you go, all right, everybody, listen to me. Step 1, right. Step 2, step 3. And it's so naive and foolish and prideful and so many other things. And versus like, and I guess I understand why the approach we're talking about, the sort of collaboration approach, the coming and learning and listening, recognizing that you have a lot to learn from them before you even begin to try to help anything, is that it takes longer. And there is no cookie cutter approach. There is no formula. The only formula is listening. But what it means is that in every context, whether you're in Costa Mesa or Bosnia or wherever, it's going to look different, right? It won't, if you go and look at these different peacemaking, and that's why I'm really glad we're doing this series, because by talking to different people doing peacemaking, obviously you can notice a few similarities in the approach, but it all looks really different. This is what I find really fascinating, right? The kinds of things that are being done and the ways we're doing them are unique to the environment. They're unique to the community. They're unique to that culture, because I think they have to be. They can't be something that we baked over here, in America in some lab, and now we're mass producing it. Like, I think that's such an American way of looking at it. But
true.
Yeah, again, this to me is what's beautiful. It's what allows this sort of day-to-day, moment-to-moment posture of really, again, like we talked about in one of our previous interviews, right? The power under and power with. And I think that's beautiful. I really love that. I love that we get to share stories like this for people listening to the Peace Catalyst podcast. Because if you are someone who wants to do peacemaking, or even if you are doing peacemaking, I think these are the kind of conversations that can help draw us back to models that to me look a lot more like Jesus and a lot less like, yeah, we've got it all figured out.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we can even cause harm by approaching peace building in that sort of way of, I know what's right. I have the answers. I'm going to implement this program here without, taking the time to be with people and learn from them. So I think that's really important.
Oh, no, I totally agree with you. And I don't know, we may have mentioned this before. I can't remember. I'm getting old, but there's some really great films. I love movies that kind of illustrate that, how we come in with that approach and we end up causing damage and harm. So the two movies that pop in my mind, I feel like are the best in that. One is called The Mission with Robert De Niro. It's really great. It talks about Catholic missionaries in South America and how they come in with the best of intentions, but because they come in with that approach, they end up causing a lot of suffering, sadly.
Yeah.
And then the other one is a film a little more recently. It's called Silence with Liam Neeson, and it's directed by Martin Scorsese. It's based on a wonderful book called Silence about missionaries Catholic missionaries in Japan. And that's one of the things that stands out in that film is how, there's a scene in Silence where one of the Japanese is talking to the Catholic priest, and he talks about how, other priests have come before and they couldn't be bothered to learn our language. They couldn't be bothered to learn our culture. They depended on Japanese who spoke English or, who could translate, right, for them, because they themselves had no concern for that. And then later on, a bit of a spoiler, but nothing big. But later on in the film, that same priest who came in with that sort of old model we're talking about of shut up and listen to me, I got all the answers. He kind of turns the corner and he adopts a very different approach where he actually marries a Japanese woman. He has Japanese children. He learns the language. He becomes a part of the culture. He dresses in Japanese dress. And now all of a sudden he has way more understanding, first of all, and way more influence and impact in the people around him than he did when he walked around, dressed in like a Catholic priest and, speaking his language, not theirs, imposing his ideas onto theirs without understanding it. And the film does a really, really good job of illustrating even just the breakdown in language barriers and communications and unintentional consequences of these things where, he thinks he's telling them one thing, but what they're hearing and understanding is something so radically different that when he finds out what they think he's saying, it's like, oh no, that's not what I meant at all, but it's too late. You've convinced them. You've done a wonderful job of convincing them something that you never intended to convince them of, right?
Totally.
Because I think now we have the benefit of looking back and seeing, yeah, this is destructive. This isn't helpful.
Right.
And it ends up creating problems, for future generations. And now they can't, before they can even begin, they have to undo the damage we did, 100 years ago.
Yeah, totally. And that sucks. But I think that's such a great illustration. And it kind of makes me think too, like you're talking about the Jesus way of doing this work, of doing peacemaking. And I think the Jesus way is it's being with, it's living with, it's crying with, it's even suffering with what others are suffering. And really, like you said, becoming kind of part of like that community, not to say like, oh, now I'm one of you, because you can never be one of them.
Right.
But now you have an understanding, so you can collaborate with them.
Yeah, I agree. I think, it's not to sort of come in and pretend, oh, look, I'm one of you. But there is something that happens when the people group that you're wanting to serve, when, I think there's, because I've seen this with my friend Chrissy in Costa Mesa and the way she was approaching community building there. I don't know how to say it. It's sort of like when the people around you come to you and they begin to treat you like you're one of the community. You know what I mean? Like it's sort of like you win a lot of, I guess, permission, right? You get permission from them.
Trust.
Yeah, trust and permission that you built, you know, and again, it could take years. It could take years for them to kind of get, because I'm sure at first there is sort of this suspicion of like, yeah, we know what you're doing. You're just going through the motions. But
and you're going to leave
yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're going to leave in a few years and blah, blah, blah. You know, someone's going to
not really with us.
Right. Or there's some agenda. You're only pretending to care about this because you're trying to, you know, blah, 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 get your numbers or you know,
make money.
Hit your goals or whatever. And so I think, part of disarming that suspicion, which is, I think, valid again, because of years of really bad, some toxic and destructive things that have done in the name of Jesus. I think we have to sort of reach a place where they know that they really can trust us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the most beautiful part of it is relationship. I mean, it's loving and being loved, and that's kind of at the end of the day the most important thing.
Yeah, so. Totally agree.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. And for more information about Peace Catalyst, and if you'd like to support our peace building work, please visit our website at peacecatalyst.org.
Yeah, thank you.